Hello, everybody. It's great to be with you. Sorry we are not there having lunch with you. Um, Welcome to the session on the psychology of wealth. Some of you maybe have trained as financial professionals or wealth advisors and maybe thinking, I'm acting like a psychologist. I'm working with my clients around the psychological issues around wealth. This is a session for you. I am getting, just to say, a lot of noise. We on the panel are getting the noise inside the studio. So if we could mute the studio, thank you. Um, so my name is Chuck Collins. I am your moderator. Job is I work at the Institute for Policy Studies, co-directing a program on inequality and the common good. I'm an author of a book called Born on Third Base. I connect to this panel in one way because of I won the lottery at birth. I'm the great grandson of the meatpacker Oscar Mayer, and so I've been wrestling with issues of wealth. I wrote a book called Born on Third Base, and I now have a novel out called Altar to an Erupting Sun. And we are excited to have this conversation, not about sort of the technical issues of financial investing, but on the sort of psychology of wealth and what are sort of the emotional challenges that people are encountering as they face even wanting to give substantial wealth away. People are still coming up against the challenges of how much is enough and what is my meaning and how will I support myself and all these other questions. So, what better group of resource people to have this conversation, to think about this, than the three folks that we've assembled? And we are spanning the globe this morning. Jeff Halpern is a clinical psychologist and psychotherapist who's worked on both ends of the wealth spectrum, so to speak. On the one hand, he's done mental health service work for marginalized and disaffected members of society. And on the other hand, working with wealth holders who are grappling with the psychological challenges of rethinking the management of wealth. So we are thrilled that Jeff is with us. He's coming in from Portugal. Rachel Sherman, raise your hand, Rachel, wave. Rachel Sherman is a sociologist of culture and class. She's currently writing a book called Class Traders, One Percenters for Radical Redistribution. The book is based on over 100 interviews with wealth redistributors and the organizers and communities that support them working against accumulation. And Rachel gets the special prize for getting up early. It's 6 a.m. on the west coast of California. So thank you, Rachel, for joining us early in the morning. And Iris Brilliant is an anti-capitalist money coach for wealthy leftists. She was formerly a national organizer of the US-based Resource Generation Group. She offers couples and family coaching as well as group programs to support wealthy people to overcome emotional blocks to redistribution, heal from the ways that wealth interferes with our relationships, and develop a grounded and humble relationship to money. So those are our resource folks. We know we have a short but substantial amount of time with you. So let's dive right in. And I wanted to ask Iris to start us off, just talking from your life experience and as a coach, what are the common emotional costs to being wealthy? And what are the emotional benefits of redistributing wealth?
Hi, everybody. Nice to kind of meet you. Yes, there are many emotional costs to accumulating wealth or inheriting wealth. And just as a caveat, I say all of this not to throw a pity party for the wealthy, but rather just to point out how capitalism doesn't serve anybody ultimately on an emotional and spiritual level. And these feel like really important things to address for us to really tackle the issues of capitalism and wealth inequality. So, what I see time and time again with my clients is when they inherit wealth, there's this choice that they have to face, that we have to face, of either keeping ourselves open and sharing our wealth. I forgot to start my timer. I'm sorry, Chuck. And keeping the resources flowing and moving and not grasping on too tightly, or barricading the wealth. And that's what most of us do. That's what most financial planners incentivize us to do. That's what most of our parents and family members would really encourage, if not punish us for not doing. And when we barricade our wealth and close ourselves off from sharing our resources with others, we also barricade our hearts. And that might sound a little bit cheesy or something, but I see it happen again and again, that at the moment that people inherit wealth, I work with people who out of nowhere seemingly inherit tens of millions of dollars. Suddenly, as they hold on to that wealth, experience such disconnect in their closest relationships. And then we have to justify why we are keeping all of these resources to ourselves, be it just our individual selves or just with our spouse and our children. We have to justify that. And the only way to do that is to create distance from others, even if we're not conscious that we're doing that. It's kind of impossible to be deeply close to others who are in material strife, to be deeply connected to communities that need resources, and to pretend or deny that we have the ability to share those resources and to turn away from that. You can't get both. You can't have that emotional intimacy and that real sense of connection without sharing resources. In addition, I work with a lot of people, myself included, who were raised as wealthy. And a lot of us were raised primarily by people who were paid to take care of us. I know I grew up with an au pair. That's the case for many of us. And there's nothing wrong or bad about those relationships. But when your most formative relationships are shaped by employing others, and those employees can get fired at any time, and they often do, or you reach a certain age where it's no longer makes sense to be cared for by those individuals, it creates so much confusion around our relationships, around our sense of belonging. And then if you expand that out into this constant suspicion that we're really trained into, that others only are relating to us because of our money. Again, relationships are confusing for all of us, but when you add in that extra layer of wondering about who is really in our life, for what reasons, it just makes our fundamental way of relating to others rooted in suspicion, rooted in so much fear of being exploited that we end up exploiting others in kind of an ironic way. And then lastly, and I know this article is in the resource list, it's a very short article I wrote, but having wealth stunts emotional growth. There's kind of no way around that, especially being raised wealthy. You are buffered from the consequences of your actions. You can evade accountability. You don't have to learn from your mistakes. You don't have to develop the same resilience and tools that the majority of the world has to do in order to navigate life, because you always have the crutch of money to get out of hard situations. So I mostly talked about the problems, but what I'll say in terms of the benefits of redistribution, I don't want to paint it as all rainbows and butterflies. Like, redistribution is hard work, both for the person who's doing it, and it creates a lot of beautiful complexities when we're giving interpersonally and giving to organizations. But I see that it ultimately builds so much confidence. It creates possibility for connection that wasn't there before. It opens up that barricade, which just creates so many possibilities of building community, of having hard and wonderful conversations that you wouldn't have been able to access previously. And ultimately, it can expand our sense of who we care about, who cares about us, and help us rethink safety and security.
Thank you, Iris. That was really a great way to kind of open us up to this conversation. Reminds me of, I once heard someone say, privilege is a disconnection drug. Wealth is a disconnection drug. It keeps us apart, keeps us from being connected in authentic relationships. Of course, the antidote is connection, as you say. Jeff, you have, as you said in your description, you've worked with people all along the class spectrum. But talk a little bit as a psychologist, the perspective of a psychologist, how you are able to support, or how you're of value to wealth holders in these situations.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And hello, everybody. I think so, with a general point, which is obviously money is more than a medium of economic exchange. It's also a really important personal and social symbol, and it can be really quite fundamental to how we see ourselves and how we believe others value us. Money can represent freedom, control, agency, success, status, all sorts of things. And for that reason, I think it becomes a very emotionally laden. And small wonder, perhaps, that people fear losing it, relinquishing it because of what it represents to them. I think some of these fears will be rational, some will be quite irrational, and many will be unconscious, if you like. We imbibe them, they're part of our culture and society. But they can all be really important in driving our behavior. I think one of the problems that alongside this is there's a lack of openness to discussion about money. People don't really talk about their relationship to money. People don't talk to each other about their money. They talk about things, but not their money. And even within families, you may, well, I certainly have had conversations with people who said, I really don't know how much money the family does have. I don't know what our situation actually is. So there's a real lack of openness. And I think because of this, attitudes, feelings about money are often quite unexplored and laden with the unknown for all of us. And I think as a result of that, there's the correspondence between our values and our behavior in relation to money is quite limited. That there's what we actually do, and there's what we actually might like to think we are, and there's what we're prepared to admit that we are. And I think all these can be quite different. So I think psychologically it's quite an unexplored part of our lives. And, I think there's so many myths around money, this idea, for example, wealthy people do hear this quite a lot. If I had your money, I'd have nothing to complain about. Everything would be great. And this is one of our great cultural myths, isn't it? The money is the great solution. And of course, that's nonsense. As we know, it's actually nonsense. And wealthy people have all sorts of problems. And one of the difficulties of that kind of attitude, of course, is that, and you hear people say this as they increase their wealth, is that the wealthier they get, the less they feel justified in actually speaking about their problems and their difficulties and what the money means to them, because it's like they're complaining and they have no right or justification to complain. There is no rhyme or reason when you're rich to complain about anything. Again, these are generalizations, but there's some truths, and they represent an important kind of element of our culture. I mean, the reality, of course, is that growing up with, echoing some of your points, Iris, growing up with a lot of money can be very, very difficult. And growing up in families that have gained huge success, huge amounts of money, can be difficult for children because they actually find it hard to know where to locate themselves within this. How do I prove myself? How do I have the success my parents and their prosperous friends have had? How do I, for some people, they can, if you like, this propels them to quite a strong identity and a sense of purpose in life. But others, I think it can leave them quite adrift, feeling actually quite pessimistic about their ability to be successful in any meaningful way in their life. And that can lead into a kind of aimless drift, particularly because they're supported by a lot of money, which means there's no financial risk or imperative to do anything. And the drift towards a sort of aimless, depressed life can be quite rapid and distressing. I don't know how I'm doing for time here, Chuck, when I'm rambling on, but I think that there's also clearly the feelings of shame, guilt, embarrassment about the wealth that one has, how to live, how I'm perceived by others. I think the rich are still a kind of undifferentiated group against whom a chorus of abuse is still acceptable, particularly in social media. And I think for wealthy people that can be, who are trying to do things differently, that can be very difficult when they feel that we're all tarnished with the same brush. I'm not perceived for who I am and what I do simply by the size of my legacy, my bank balance, my family's attributes, and so on. And I think that's very difficult. And I think the acquisition of new money is very hard to manage at times in terms of identity, shifting who I am, who are my friends now, what friendship circle can I move into? And one of the difficulties, of course, with growing up with a lot of money is that you are in a particular bubble, a particular cohort where you feel comfortable. And if you're not successful within that cohort, that bubble, it can be quite difficult to move outside of it, where you may not feel very welcome or indeed very confident. So, I mean, this is just a kind of smattering of the kind of difficulties that wealth can bring. And so, coming back to your question, I guess what I'm saying is that psychology can increase one's appreciation and understanding of the potentially very complex interplay between wealth and one's personal and emotional world, and how that influences what you're able to do or not do with money. And I think with greater insight and awareness and understanding, people are a better place to actually make the kind of decisions about managing their assets that they would really like to.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you.
Okay.
You know, a lot of what you're saying is, you know, you can imagine just how radical those insights are in this conversation, how important they are. And I'm glad Rachel is here, because I think it'd be interesting as a sociologist, Rachel, to sort of hear how you think about, you know, sort of these individual psychological challenges in the larger cultural context. It's not an accident that people are having these experiences. So share some thoughts with us as somebody who's really interviewing people and thinking about this every day.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck, and hi, everybody. Yeah, I mean, it's very resonant with what I have been hearing from people I've interviewed, both what Iris and Jeff have been saying. And one thing I just want to start by signaling is the complicated relationship between one's individual morality and their position in a social distribution. And, you know, so to feel guilty or to have all of these different kinds of feelings about having wealth because we live in a system where wealth is so unevenly distributed, I think becomes itself a challenge. It's like for white people recognizing that they have white privilege in a white supremacist society. It actually doesn't mean anything bad about white people, you know, individually that were racists or whatever. It just means that we have an unreasonable benefit. And I think for people who benefit in economic terms, who are of course typically also white, there's a similar thing that's part of especially what Jeff, I think, is describing. But what I wanted to talk about a little bit in terms of my own research is the cultural context that I think leads to what Iris called barricading, you know, which is an attempt that rich people, like we often think rich people are greedy and, you know, terrible hoarders and so on. But I actually think that mostly what they're trying to do is to be morally good people. They're trying to be successful and morally worthy. And usually we're socialized, certainly in the US context, which is where my research is mostly taking place, to think that accumulating wealth is the way to be a good person, right? And a successful person. And this happens in a number of different kind of areas. You know, in general, I think in the US, the accumulation is good. We have this sort of fetish of the American dream and so on. But I think that plays out in a particular way with wealthy people, which is that they don't actually need money, but they keep accumulating it or not redistributing it because they understand that as a way to be a good person. So, you know, to be successful, especially I think if you're a man, means accumulating wealth, right? And this is true even if you already have more wealth than you need. And Jeff sort of alluded to this, right? How do you be successful if you already have money, like if you can't accumulate money? So then you try to accumulate money. I interviewed someone who controls $100 million in family wealth. And he felt bad that he was not working in finance to contribute to what he called the family nut. So, you know, and this is also attached to the stigma of inheriting, right? You're a better person if you can say that you earned it. Then at the same time, being a good consumer means you can think of yourself as saving or spending prudently, right? The same guy I just mentioned said, well, you know, I didn't want to do work in finance, but I live in a very reasonable way or something, and, you know, told me all about how reasonable his lifestyle was, as if that were, you know, that's the way to be kind of claiming moral worth when you can't be saying that you're accumulating money yourself. And at the same time, you know, being a good parent means ensuring that your kids don't want for anything, making sure they have security. I think that's sort of what Iris is alluding to, of younger people who are trying to redistribute often encounter parents who really don't want them to do that because they're afraid for their security. And beyond even the sort of next generation, particularly in inheritor families, there's this idea of stewarding money for the future, as again a way of being a good person. So again, the same person that I was mentioning talked about how he would give away a significant amount of his wealth. He said $30 million. If he could know that there would be a good return on investment in terms of doing something really important for the world, like new technology for recycling plastic. But if that couldn't be guaranteed, he didn't want to, quote, risk my great-grandchildren's money, right? So that's the safe bet, is to like hold on to the money, right? And maybe this is a little bit more intense in the US because we basically have no social safety net. So of course, it is somewhat unreasonable that very rich people are going to find themselves in the street, but we don't have a kind of general sort of common good social welfare program that we could imagine would save us. And then just a couple other things. I mean, I think parents also want to raise children who have a work ethic because they're afraid of their kids being, entitled and sort of, as Jeff was saying, aimless. And so they often don't talk to them about money. And then the kids don't know how much money they have because the parents sort of want to raise them as if they didn't have any money, except that they do, but they're never taught how to deal with that. And so then in general, all of this is the kind of Protestant ethic, right, of accumulating through hard work and disciplined consumption. And that becomes the moral environment that people are being socialized into. And it becomes very difficult to say, I have more than I need, right? Or I don't deserve what I have, without feeling like morally compromised. And then the last thing is, financial advisors are rewarded both symbolically in terms of like thinking that they're doing a good job, and financially for accumulating on behalf of their clients, right? And, people who manage money, tax advisors are all about saving their clients money on taxes. Even philanthropic advisors, I think, are very rarely encouraged to do anything, encourage their clients to do anything truly sort of radical with their money. And so, all of those are institutional ways in which this culture of accumulation, or an imperative of accumulation, sort of continues.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, I think that there's this sort of like almost default position around unlimited accumulation and dynastic succession, that in some ways the wealth management industry reinforces and plays into that. And I think we want to talk about that. We've kind of laid out some of the terrain here. I think the next section we really want to talk about are there other impediments to people sort of, and sort of how are people overcoming them? And each of you have insights into that question. So, and actually maybe we could go back to Iris just to start with, you talked about impediments, but how are you helping people? How do people overcome some of these limitations or challenges in your experience?
Yeah,
asking each of you, I think, 4 minutes or so just on that, so we have more time to talk.
I'm going to remember to start my time this time. So I think one of the biggest impediments that I see clients having, which financial planners and those in the wealth defense industry fully reinforce, is the framework that we use is wrong. If the framework that we use around thinking about safety and security is, I need to have enough money to handle any crisis that my very creative mind can conceive of ever, and only then will I know that I'm going to be okay. If you feel like you need enough money to handle any theoretical crisis in the future, you will never feel like you have enough. It's an absurd idea. I shouldn't have enough food that I need for every meal that I'm going to eat for the rest of my life in my house. The food's going to go bad. It doesn't make any sense, but for some reason with money, that's how we're trained into thinking about it. And we will not be able to redistribute wealth if we're still in that framework. And instead, I support clients to think about, who could I lean on in moments of hardship and in crisis? How can I set up my life to feel resilient enough to handle the inevitable crises that are going to happen individually, collectively, as a society. It's not about avoiding crisis, avoiding pain, illness, death, all of the things that happen. It's about developing resilience in your relationships, adaptability in your life in order to handle life's challenges. And additionally, who's going to be able to lean on me? You know, the financial planning model and so much of this is just about me, me, me. How can I make sure I will be okay? But what about you supporting others? And when we make ourselves an essential pillar of support for others, when we make ourselves available to support others, we do create more safety and security in our lives. We also create more fulfillment and meaning and joy. And that should always be part of our plan, not just about how will I be okay and be supported, but how will I show up and support others. I do relationship mapping with my clients where we map out who are all the people that you love. Who's everyone that you feel connected to? Who do you want to feel closer to? At first, people are surprised. They're like, I hired you to be my money coach. Why are we talking about my friendships? But it's because those relationships are essential in order for us to redistribute wealth. And until we have the relational skills, I was joking in our prep call that part of my work is helping people learn how to make friends. But that is actually a big part of my work, not only how to make friends, but how to be a good friend, how to be a good community member, how to have authenticity and real intimacy in our lives as the trade for excess wealth. So we do relationship mapping, not only about who we love and care about, but also about who we share money with. And usually it's, I share money with my one monogamous spouse, but I love lots of people. Why wouldn't we share money? Why wouldn't we consider at least sharing money with the people that we love, sharing money in the communities that we care about, as one form of the many forms of love and support that we can offer others? Another impediment, I was inspired by what Rachel shared about the family nut, and I felt kind of icked when you were talking about that. It's so true. It's so ingrained in our bodies to feel like we are a failure to our descendants. We're a failure to our unborn children and unborn grandchildren if we don't preserve this nut forever. But so part of what I support clients to consider is the legacy of redistribution is a valuable legacy to offer your descendants. And to just really consider this assumption that inheriting wealth that you did nothing to earn, in addition to all of the pressure and conditioning that comes with that money, isn't necessarily a gift. And the best gifts that we can offer our children, and again, I say this as someone who is raised wealthy, is quality time, emotional nurturance. Of course, we want to meet our children's material needs, but that doesn't need to be millions of dollars. And equipping our children and our descendants to have the skills to handle life, have the skills to become resilient, adaptable, generous people. And I believe that that will set our descendants, our children up to have more fulfilling lives than leaving them with money that they didn't earn. Is Chuck frozen? Oh no.
Chuck
Oh,
is
good.
frozen.
Chuck
You're back.
That was my Elon Musk satellite. He's trying to keep me from hearing Iris's last phrase. But let's turn to Jeff. Same question. Sort of, what are the impediments? You've described some of them, but how do we help people move through those? What are the things that you found to be useful?
And I'm just catching on to Iris's last point about just really saying how money is prioritized above everything else in terms of, but quite unconsciously, I think at times, about in terms of what's going to make us happy in our lives, what we need to do. And yes, in response to your question, which links that, I think strongly. I think, well, however committed one is to the principle of redistribution and sharing wealth, for some people it is obviously more difficult for all sorts of reasons. some specific examples are very much that I've come across are very much in relation to family. I think questioning the implicit family intent to grow the family fortune and to protect it for the next generation actually is really very challenging and creates a lot of friction within a family. And I think that's a very difficult starting point for many people. I think a lot of roads lead us to the same place from here, which is what kind of supports can we offer people in this situation, both emotional, social, psychological, and particularly from a financial framework in terms of options and encouragement. But I think actually challenging what is often powerful figures within the family, often powerful patriarchal figures who amass the wealth and who are responsible for the good life that one is living, is really quite difficult. And it can feel very intimidating, and particularly in a context in which siblings may not agree, spouses may not agree, children may not, family friends may not agree with your radical vision for the future. And I think the dissenting family member can be seen as very much betraying the family, not only the living family, but also the past generations who've helped to build the wealth. This is a betrayal on a major stage, major dimension. And it feels like their achievements are being denigrated. I think this is how the family can react. Many families, for example, take great pride in their philanthropic work, but to have a member of the family say, well, okay, that's okay as far as it goes, but some of it may feel inadequate, it may feel like gesture, and it may actually be quite infantilizing. It may not be the best route forward. Family members can take great offense to what they feel is very good work that they've done, which is now being undermined. And I think people can experience quite a fear of a fracture of relationships, of loss within their family, which is threatening, intimidating, and quite scary. And there's quite a lot of pressure, if you like, to be compliant. And I think when we think about inherited wealth, if somebody within the family is saying, I'm going to disinherit my children, I don't think this is the way forward, they can also find themselves labelled as, in some ways, a bad parent, a bad mother, bad father, by virtue of the fact that they're, if you like, withholding the advantages from their children that they themselves experienced. And that can leave people feeling very torn and very troubled. And they do need a lot of support out of this. I mean, the absence of a really strong infrastructure is very telling, as we've just been hearing, and I agree very strongly. Many financial advisors are going to necessarily be very committed professionally and emotionally to sustaining the family wealth. That's what they've always done. That's what's been expected of them, and so they may not be the best source of support for a dissenting family member. So actually, there is a strong role for the financial advisors to play there, particularly in relation to helping people think about what is enough, a question that often comes up. How will I know what is enough? And actually not knowing the answers to that can feel quite paralyzing, because the answer can sometimes be, well, I better do nothing because I'm scared. I don't know what it really means, what it's going to feel like. I think in answer to that, the social financial support is very important. I think also many people with wealth see such a strong need, a powerful need to do something radical and effective in their lives that actually it can be quite awe-inspiring. It can feel quite intimidating. Where do I begin? There's almost not enough that I can do that's ever going to feel all right. And that in itself can be quite difficult, because there's a feeling, well, nothing is enough that I do. But actually, sometimes it's not easy to do everything. And in order to preserve one's well-being, mental health, and relationships, sometimes you need to just make an informed decision about what can I manage in this situation? What is going to be, if you like, good enough by way of me making a start at doing these important things in life? How do I find that direction? How do I find what I'm comfortable with? This is tricky. And as a psychologist, I find myself trying to balance the needs of the individual against, if you like, there's a wider good here, and think with the person about what can they do? And for them, there's a lot to explore about what's possible and what will feel comfortable. Okay.
Thank you, Jeff. And I wonder let's maybe go into Rachel, who also, from your research, Rachel, how are people overcoming some of these impediments? You're talking to the people who are doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I very much echo everything that Jeff and Iris just said. And it really shows, especially what Jeff just said, really shows the moral dimensions of all of this, right? And the ways people are kind of socialized to do particular things as a way of acting in a morally worthy way. I think the biggest thing is, getting into communities and groups of people that understand this differently. And so are able to put forth some of what Iris was talking about in terms of alternative ways of thinking about this, right? So breaking silence, to being in community where you can talk about money, and do what Jeff called, complaining, the thing that wealthy people don't want to do in front of other people, but can do with sort of like-minded other wealthy people, makes a huge difference. Just talking about, what can you do as someone who's interested in redistribution? There's not knowledge about that is not widespread. So it's really important to develop kind of networks and communities. It's not, there are different theories of change and power and how people can use money. It's not just about like giving away money in some, willy-nilly. There actually needs to be some kind of direction to what the choices that people are making, and how to use power that's not only like in the form of money, which wealthy people also often have. I think creating relationships, as I said, kind of within class, but also across class, and developing meaningful community, as Iris was in the ways Iris was talking about. And then in communities like this, people get support in thinking about how much is enough, being able to explicitly have those conversations, how to talk to their family members, who think that they're insane, how to just be seen as not insane by other people. And so I just want to really emphasize the organizations and the kind of organizational ecosystem that makes this possible. And, Chuck, in introducing Iris, you mentioned resource generation. I think in the UK, there's resource transformation. That's a really central place for younger people to come and talk about these issues. It's been a huge part of my own research. There are other progressive donor networks and progressive organizations that may or may not be, exclusive to wealthy people. Typically, they're not. But no, I don't think any wealthy person comes and is like, I think I'm just going to give away a bunch of money to super progressive things and challenge all of the narratives about accumulation and hoarding and necessity without being in community with other people, again, within and across class. So I think that that's what is needed in order for people to create alternative narratives about entitlement, about distribution, about morality. And I think that that's what has to happen in order for this kind of redistributive action to become more widespread.
Thank you, Rachel, for that. That's such a key insight. And actually, part of the good news is there is this emerging ecosystem of people thinking about wealth differently and thinking about how to redistribute. Where that maybe it's something about the late stage of capitalism we're in, where even the people who benefit from the extreme inequalities see how undermining they are to the quality of life. The ecological crisis needs attention, the desire to move resources. In our final couple minutes, maybe we can, and thanks again, Rachel. And I should say in the show, in the program and the notes, we're going to assemble some of try to map that ecosystem a bit, and share some of the resources, groups like Good Ancestor Movement in the UK, the Patriotic Millionaires in the UK, the US, Solidaire Network. There's a whole rich ecosystem of organizations, and it's to me one of the encouraging and hopeful signs on the horizon. Maybe in our final moments, so let's talk a little bit. And for those of you who are listening who work in this field, work as wealth managers, we have a couple of us here. Any sort of coaching or insights that we might offer to those of you who are in the wealth management industry around engaging wealthy clients to go beyond the sort of gospel of unlimited accumulation and dynastic succession? And maybe Iris has thought a lot about this. If you could speak to that. If we have any leftover time, we could do a quick round robin. So
I'll speak briefly, and just to name that, I have an article coming up about this, and I'm making a guide for those of you in the wealth defense industry or wealth planners. So just to plug that, I would say first, consider celebrating your clients who want to pay their taxes. I know it goes against all of your training, but there's been too many times where I've had clients finally stand up to their financial advisor and say, I actually believe in taxes as a form of democracy and would like to pay them, and then receive a really condescending or belittling response. And I just encourage you to, support clients who want to pay their not even fair share of taxes, really just the legal bare minimum of taxes. I think that's really important for your progressive clients, and to not treat it as financially unsavvy. Another is to, instead of treating charitable giving as the last stage in financial planning of, okay, I'm going to help you have enough money for your first home and your second home and your children's colleges and all these things, and then whatever pennies are left, we can talk about giving. Consider bringing it in earlier into the process. Consider, especially if you know that it's important to your clients because they have social justice values, you could start with redistribution. You could actually change the whole order and get really creative with this. It doesn't have to just be about tax write-offs. It can be about honoring your clients' values and helping them build a plan they actually believe in. And then, lastly, to Rachel's point about the need for financial transparency, for those of you who also do estate planning, really encourage your clients to talk transparently early and often with their children about their net wealth, to make a collaborative plan together, instead of it's really awful to have your parents die and then discover how much money you're inheriting and then emotionally process that and never have spoken with them about it. So at minimum, to support your clients to start practicing talking about that early and often, to make collaborative plans with their family members. Thanks.
Thank you, Iris. I'm really looking forward to that article, and I could tell that you've been thinking about this, and it just flowed out in that. But yeah, the sort of the trusted family advisors have enormous power in these situations, and if they're simply reinforcing the cultural norm of tax minimization, we're seeing historic levels of tax avoidance globally and within the wealthy, affluent countries, trillions of dollars moving to the shadows. That does not bode well for the future. Rachel, any in our final moments, Rachel and Jeff, any thoughts on this? Speaking to the audience
I'll just say, I think everything Iris just said was fantastic, but I also just, the broader thing is rethinking what self-interest is, right? For your clients, what is in their interest? And Chuck, you just said a minute ago, the people who benefit from inequality, like in a certain way, rich people do benefit from inequality, but in a lot of ways they really don't. And so to think about like, why push accumulation as the central goal of everything, financial planning, estate planning, and so on? What else might be in people's self-interest? It's not about noblesse oblige. It's not about being a good philanthropic whatever. It's actually about benefiting yourself by not living in a world that is collapsing. And that's all I'll say. Thanks.
Well, Jeff, the final minute, any thoughts?
The final minute is just to say, yes, I'd echo that and think encouraging my clients to explore these issues, it feels really important. I'd just say that I'm old enough to remember when, you wouldn't expect this as a psychologist though, but in my early days as a psychologist, people often didn't ask their clients about their sex lives. And I feel that this chimes with me now. But if I speak to psychologists and say, do you talk to your clients about money and what it means to them? And, they don't. It just doesn't really come up. And I just think this is, this encourages me further today to think that this is really important. And we've all bought into this. And I think actually a self-consciousness about money actually sometimes prevents psychologists even asking the questions, because they haven't really even asked the questions of themselves. So none of us are free of this. We've all bought into this in our culture, and we can all learn from it. And part of starting a communication around these things is really important. My final word.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I know our session has come to a close, and again, sorry we're not in the room to chat in the hallways and get to know you all better. And it's awfully hard doing a Zoom event where we don't get to hear anybody laugh or yell out at us or anything. So, but maybe we can offer Iris, Rachel, and Jeff our applause virtually and in person. And please we look forward to future conversations. So thanks for having us all.